Michael tried to be like his father in everything. And it wasn't because Stephen Hill was rich and successful, but because he always remained a decent man who didn't like to boast about his wealth. Michael knew that his father was a self-made man who had to work very hard to achieve everything he had. Meanwhile, Stephen Hall was the complete opposite of his wife, who led a rather idle lifestyle and didn't burden herself with too much work. While her husband spent his days at work, Penelope spent her days shopping or in beauty salons and expensive restaurants. Although it didn't mean that the woman was a bad wife or an irresponsible mother, she was simply bad with money and could never save up enough for an initial investment to start her own business. Stephen never criticized his wife for it and always treated her with care and tenderness. However, he wanted to raise his son to do better at doing business than his wife, so the man devoted all of his free time to Michael's upbringing. Michael grew up as a sharp and intelligent boy who made his parents proud with his grades, first at school, then at the university. Stephen was very happy with how the boy turned out and did his best to ensure that he was never in need of anything. Owning a small but rather profitable company, the businessman stood firmly on his feet and could afford himself most of what he dreamed of in his youth. He had a beautiful 2-story house, an expensive car, as well as some money in his bank account, which was kind of a safety cushion for him. When Michael graduated from the university, he chose to follow in his father's footsteps. However, he decided against working for his father's company, but instead got a job at another, smaller firm. "Dad, I want to try my hand at something different. If it doesn't work out, I will always be able to join your firm," Michael said at dinner. Stefan looked at his son carefully and then accepted his choice with due humility. The man knew that until Michael got a taste of the business world, he wouldn't understand that the most important thing was to stick together. Stefan understood that his son didn't want to work at the company where everyone could only see him as the owner's son and would thus treat him as yet another spoiled kiddo. Having started working as a manager in a small company, Michael showed himself as a responsible and diligent employee from day one. The man liked what he was doing, which was confirmed by his success at the job. When Michael Hall first came to the company, many of the women working there immediately noticed him. The man was good-looking and well-mannered, which favorably distinguished him from most of the other employees. The first woman who dared to speak to the handsome man was Charlie Hudson, whose desk was closest to the one allocated to the new manager. The young woman had been working in the company for several years, and therefore she knew her way around it. However, the attitude towards her at the office was very ambiguous. Some people considered her a beauty worth of imitation, while others saw her as a conniving and unprincipled woman who would do anything to get her way. Since Michael didn't have much experience with women and didn't know how to distinguish between sincere interest and meaningless flirting, he quickly fell under the spell of the seductive beauty. Of course, he didn't rush into anything and actually controlled himself quite well at first. However, after just a couple of dates with Claire, the young manager realized that he was in love. Their romance developed so quickly that Michael simply didn't have time to properly assess the situation and understand what he wanted from this relationship. He enjoyed spending time with Claire, and the fire of passion that was burning in his heart only made him want this relationship even more. Quite expectedly, the change in his son's behavior aroused interest in Stephen Hall. "Isn't Michael too young to have a serious relationship? Although I was the same at his age," the businessman reasoned with himself. Meanwhile, Michael continued to date Claire, who seemed to be very eager to marry him. It's hard to say how it all would have ended up if a new employee hadn't come to work at the firm. Natalie Simpson was the complete opposite of Claire, both by character and appearance. Having been assigned the space right next to Michael, the woman immediately plunged headlong into work and never took part in any of the office drama. Soon, Natalie's hard work paid off, and she started showing results that were several times better than that of Michael's achievements. "She's an insufferable, arrogant woman. I'm sure she doesn't have a boyfriend, and she never will," Claire once said. Natalie tried to ignore her colleagues' caustic comments and continued to work as if nothing happened. Despite the fact that the woman always dressed modestly, she wasn't bad-looking and was very interesting to talk to. If Michael hadn't been in a relationship with Claire, he probably would have turned his attention to her. However, being a good man with high morals, he couldn't allow himself even the thought of cheating on his girlfriend. On the other hand, Natalie didn't seem the least bit interested in having a relationship with Michael. It was enough for her to sometimes exchange a couple of words with the smart and literate young man. However, Claire saw Natalie as a rival and decided to launch a preemptive strike in order to denigrate her in Michael's eyes. Somehow, Claire managed to find out that Natalie grew up in a poor family and was living in a poor neighborhood in the city. What did this beggar forget in our company? She's dressed like a scarecrow, but dreams of making it big, doesn't she? Claire said, feeling proud of herself. Thanks to her, Natalie had become the object of close attention and regular ridicule at the office. Michael didn't share that opinion of his girlfriend and never focused on Natalie's appearance. The man knew that if Claire were to wear the same clothes as Natalie did, there would be no telling them apart. Realizing that Claire wasn't as simple of a woman as he used to think, Michael started to have doubts about their relationship. The man suddenly felt that his girlfriend was only interested in him because his father's fortune amounted to several millions of dollars. But if I didn't have so much money, I would probably be in Claire's place right now, Michael thought. The man was tormented by doubts for a long time, until he eventually decided to ask his father for advice. Having listened to his son, Stephen Hall thought for a while. It was very hard to give advice in matters of the heart, and the businessman, who had his share of his relationships in his youth, was all too well aware of this fact. His mind still held on to the memories of a great and pure love that he'd experienced during his years in college. The most interesting thing was that Stephen didn't actually love his wife. Getting married to Penelope was more of an attempt to forget the painful breakup with the woman he actually loved more than something he really wanted with his heart. The love of the businessman's life was a woman from a poor family named Rebecca. Unfortunately, Stephen's parents didn't approve of their relationship and did everything they could to break them up. Penelope also played a role in Stephen's breakup with Rebecca because Penelope's parents had long dreamed that she would get married to Stephen. Back then, 25 years ago, she showed Stephen a photograph of Rebecca with some man. Penelope didn't tell where she got the picture and only hinted that doubting its credibility would be an extremely painful mistake. However, what he saw was enough for Stephen. He stopped talking to Rebecca that same day, and despite it being extremely painful, cut her out of his life completely. But he wasn't destined to plunge into depression because Penelope was there to help him through the breakup. She quickly surrounded Stephen with care and attention, which played an important role in their future relationship. Having ultimately become his wife, Penelope got what she had dreamed of for so very long. It's highly unlikely that she loved Stephen with all of her heart, and the businessman could sense it, which prevented him from ever feeling truly happy with her. Therefore, after listening to his son's arguments, the businessman decided to help him. "I'm ready to help you out, son. Do you have some kind of a plan? What can I do to help?" Stephen Hall asked. Michael hesitated for a moment, then pulled himself together and shared his idea with his father. "I do have one interesting idea, Dad. What if I were to introduce you to my girlfriend?" Stephen raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Is this your plan? To simply introduce me to your girlfriend?" Michael smiled enigmatically and continued. "No, Dad. I have a slightly different idea. I want you to dress up as a homeless man when I introduce you to. It's important to me to see how she would react, and you could also see how she would treat you. So, what do you say? Will you do it?" To say that Stephen Hall was surprised would be a huge understatement. The businessman always considered himself to be a smart and creative man, but his son clearly had no equal in his ingenuity. Frankly speaking, Stephen found Michael's idea somewhat amusing. "Why not? It's not a bad idea. I'm so used to wearing suits that I consider them my second skin. Why not shake things up a bit and come to dinner dressed as a beggar?" the businessman said with a smile. After going over all the details with his son, Stephen started getting ready for the meeting. On the showdown day, Michael invited Claire to have dinner at a restaurant in order to introduce her to his father. "God, finally! I thought it would never happen. He's taking me to meet his father today. He's probably going to propose," the woman thought as she was getting ready for dinner. Meanwhile, Stephen carefully altered his appearance with a wig and a false beard. The businessman borrowed some clothes from the gardener, after which he smeared them with dirt for a greater effect. Having put on his new attire, Stephen smiled at his reflection in the mirror and gave himself a thumbs up. Michael didn't choose the most expensive restaurant in the city, which unspeakably upset his bride. Having that kind of money, he invited me to some diner, Claire thought, pursing her lips touchily. The insidious woman could hardly have known at the time that it would be far from her main disappointment of that evening. The real shock came when a hunched beggar approached Michael and pulled up a chair to join them at their table. "Honey, meet my dad," the man said with a serious look on his face. "What did you just say? Your dad? Is that really your father?" Claire asked with a disgusted frown. Stephen Hall coughed in embarrassment and gave the woman an appraising look. The businessman immediately realized that Claire was only dating his son for the family money. The woman acted as if it wasn't just Stephen, but Michael too, who was some kind of poor beggar. At the same time, the young manager looked so natural in his role that the conniving beauty didn't doubt even for a minute that everything that was happening was true. Not even attempting to hide her contempt, Claire got up from the table 10 minutes into the dinner. "You don't need to see me off. You better take care of yourself, or you might end up like your father soon," the woman said in parting. Father and son exchanged meaningful glances and understood each other perfectly. Thus, Michael realized that Claire didn't deserve him and that marrying her would be a huge mistake. After having a great dinner, the father and son tipped the waiter generously and left the restaurant. On their way to the car, Stephen took off his wig and peeled off his fake beard. Suddenly, Michael stopped to greet some woman. It was Natalie. She was on her way home from the store. "Hey, I was having dinner with my dad," Michael said, smiling. Natalie looked at the poorly dressed father and nodded timidly. Stephen stepped closer to get a better look at the stranger's face in the light of the street lamp. At that moment, he felt as if he was hit by a lightning bolt. It seemed that everything that was happening at that moment couldn't be true and was just a figment of his imagination or his memory playing tricks on him. No, it must just be my imagination. But she looks so much like Rebecca, it must be a coincidence. Things like that happen all the time. Thoughts rushed through the businessman's head. But no matter how much Stephen tried to convince himself, the resemblance between Natalie and his ex-girlfriend were uncanny. As the pause dragged on, the businessman decided to ask the woman the question that bothered him. "Good evening, miss. May I ask you one question? Is your mother's name Rebecca, by any chance?" Natalie turned pale, then involuntarily took 2 steps back. "Yes, sir. My mother's name was Rebecca Simpson. She actually died 3 years ago of leukemia." "Why are you asking? Did you know her?" the woman asked cautiously. Stephen lowered his eyes, after which he muttered something unintelligible. The businessman couldn't say more because he was so stunned by the news of the death of the woman he loved with all of his heart. Fortunately, Michael didn't know the real reasons for his father's behavior and continued to enjoy his chat with Natalie. Meanwhile, Stephen stood and furtively admired the young woman, who was an exact copy of his beloved Rebecca. Despite the fact that the encounter was brief, it felt like an eternity to the businessman. Having returned home, Stephen locked himself in his office and called a private detective. Stephen wanted to know everything. Did Rebecca Simpson have a husband? How old was Natalie? And if she could be his daughter? In the end, Stephen asked the detective to look into Claire Hudson too. He had to wait for about 2 weeks before he got the report. This was mainly because a DNA test was the only way to get a definitive answer to the question of possible paternity. When Stephen saw the report, he was shocked, to put it mildly. Natalie really was the businessman's daughter, and Rebecca Simpson never had a serious relationship with another man. Moreover, the detective found out that Claire Hudson didn't only want to marry Michael for money, but was also going to ruin his father's business by getting it into several unsuccessful deals. It was all the doing of Stephen's competitors who hired Claire to harm the businessman and his family. But the most shocking thing was that the photograph that Stephen got from Penelope 25 years ago turned out to be fake. Apparently, Penelope wanted to marry Stephen so badly that she decided to trick him and get him to break up with his girlfriend. Of course, too much time had passed, so there was no point in dwelling on how Stephen's life could have turned out differently if it weren't for what Penelope had done. Stephen decided not to worry about it now, since the last thing he wanted to do was sort things out with his wife. By the will of fate, he found a daughter who was Michael's half-sister. This realization made Stephen's heart fill with love, something he thought he'd never feel again. To Penelope's credit, she accepted Natalie with due calmness and didn't cause a scene. Now that there was one more child in their family, it would be wrong to be sad about the past. Therefore, everyone in this amazing story decided to simply start a new life, in which love and respect for the family would always come first.